let us consider the modern theory of trade. In the neoclassical theory of trade, we have already found that the difference in autarkic price ratio is the basis of trade. But why does the autarkic price ratio differs from country to country? So there was the Heckscher and Olin, two economists. They tried to explain the major cause of the difference in autarkic price ratio of two countries, and that's why they introduced new terms, the factor abundance and factor intensity. And as per the Heckscher-Olin theorem, the basis of trade is generated from the factor abundance and factor intensity. Now, it is a 2 cross 2 cross 2 model. That means two country, two commodity and two factors. Here we consider two factors, labor and capital. So factors are perfectly mobile within the country. That means the factors can be transferred from one sector to another, and there will be no change in productivity of the factors. So what is the implication of it? The implication of it that factor prices will remain same across the sectors of a country. Wage rate will be same across the sectors of a country. Rental rate for capital will remain same across the country. The markets are perfectly competitive. That means there will be always the marginal cost pricing. In each market, price will be exactly equal to the marginal cost. And next assumption is that the production functions are same across the sectors. Production function of a same commodity will be same across the countries. So in both countries, production function of X will be same, and in both countries, production function of Y will also be the same. But production function will X will differ from the production function of Y. Next thing is that countries can be ranked according to factor abundance. That means in this theory, one country will be relatively capital abundant country and another country will be relatively labor abundant country. How can we define factor abundance? We are coming to this in the later slide. Now, similarly, like countries, the commodities can also be ranked unambiguously as per factor intensity. That means one commodity, if it is relatively labor intensive commodity, it will remain labor intensive commodity. That means there is no chance of factor intensity reversal. And production functions are subject to constant elasticity of substitution and constant returns to scale. And next is that the trade will be free trade. Initially we consider there will be free trade. That means there is no existence of any kind of trade barriers. Now, there are two definitions. Leontief definition, it is also known as the physical definition of factor abundance. So what is Leontief definition? Very simple, that if labor capital endowment ratio in one country is greater than other country, then the former is called relatively labor abundant country, and latter will be called relatively capital abundant country. So here in our slide, A is relatively labor abundant country and B is relatively capital abundant country. You see, Leontief definition, it is a supply side definition. It considers only the supply side. Next definition is Olin's definition. Olin says country A will be relatively capital abundant if wage rental ratio in country A is less than wage rental ratio in country B. So this Leontief definition is based on the factor price. This is called price definition of factor abundance. And whenever we are considering price is the result of interaction of demand and supply. So we can say all-in definition or the price definition of factor abundance includes both the demand side factors and supply side factors. Next, factor intensity. What is factor intensity? That means it is normally measured by labor capital ratio or capital labor ratio. So here if we see that if we compare two sectors of production, in one sector labor capital ratio is more than the other sector. So here we measure the labor capital ratio whenever we are considering the labor and capital required to produce 1 unit of X and Y. So if labor capital ratio is less in X, greater in X and X, then in sector Y we can say commodity X is relatively labor intensive commodity and commodity Y is relatively capital intensive commodity. Now, what is the proposition of Chacholiades theorem? It says that relatively labor abundant country will enjoy comparative advantage in relatively labor intensive commodity and vice versa. That means a labor abundant country, relatively labor abundant country will always export relatively labor intensive commodity, and a capital abundant country will always export relatively capital intensive good. Next, so first of these, whenever we are going to prove the Chacholiades theorem, first we will consider that the taste and preference is same in both countries. So the taste and preference pattern almost same in both countries. That means both countries are represented by the same set of production community indifference curves, because community indifference curve or community indifference map represents the preference pattern of a country. So here we consider country B is relatively capital abundant and country A is relatively labor abundant country. You see, here we draw the production possibilities curve of two countries. So automatically, if a country is relatively labor abundant, it will automatically have some production bias in favor of relatively labor intensive good, and automatically similarly a relatively capital abundant country will always have production bias towards relatively capital intensive good. Okay, because production functions are same in production function of a commodity is same in both countries. So automatically if country B has more is relatively capital abundant or has relative abundance in the capital, it will be automatically be able to produce more amount of capital intensive good. So whenever we are drawing the production possibilities curve, we just see that the BB is the production possibilities curve of country B. That means country B, just see what is the maximum possible production of Y in country B is greater than maximum possible production of Y in country A. That means what? If we in country B and country A, if we employ all the factors in the production of Y, country B can produce more Y and country A can produce less Y. So vertical intercept, that is represented by the vertical intercepts of BB and A. A's production possibilities curve vertical intercept is lower than the vertical intercept of B's production possibilities curve, and automatically A will have production bias in terms of commodity X, because X is relatively labor intensive commodity and as per endowment A is relatively labor abundant country. So maximum if we employ all the resources in production of X in country A and country B, country A's maximum possible production of X will be greater than country B's maximum possible production of X. That's why we get this type of production possibilities curve. Now, under autarky, in each country, production possibilities curve will be the consumption possibility locus. So, autarkic equilibrium of country A will be represented by point E when the production possibilities curve and community indifference curves are tangent to each other. So, E is the autarkic equilibrium point of country A, and the autarkic price ratio of country A will be represented by the slope of P star. Similarly, now let us consider country B. Country B's autarkic equilibrium is point F when the PPC is tangent to CIC. So, BB is the autarkic consumption possibility locus of country B, and this indifference C, this is the CIC. So, F will represent the autarkic equilibrium of country B, production equilibrium as well as consumption equilibrium. So, what will be the autarkic price ratio? That will be represented by the slope of P, the tangent of CIC and PPC at point F. So, in this case, the slope of P represents the autarkic price ratio of country Y, and slope of P star represents the autarkic price ratio of country A. Sorry, P represents the slope of autarkic price. The slope of P represents the autarkic price ratio of country B. Slope of P star represents the autarkic price ratio of country A. So now P is steeper than P star. So autarkic price ratio in country B is more than autarkic price ratio in country A. So Px by Py in country B is greater than Px by Py in country A. That means A will enjoy comparative advantage in X and B will enjoy comparative advantage in Y. So A is a relatively labor abundant country, X is relatively labor intensive good. So from here the Chacholiades theorem is proved that relatively labor abundant country will enjoy comparative advantage in relatively labor intensive commodity, and relatively capital abundant country will enjoy comparative advantage in relatively capital intensive commodity. That is the proposition of Chacholiades theorem.